Hello, my name is Keith Kreisher. I'm the Executive Director of the IoT M2M Council, or IMC, and it is my pleasure to welcome you all to track 2 of our IoT Days spring event with a focus on embedded IoT. We're going to have a panel discussion this morning about deploying IoT on a massive scale. That should last us about 45 minutes, but we may go longer. I'm going to start with each presenter giving us a couple of slides on his company and himself and their position vis-a-vis deploying mass IoT. We did have a planned presentation on the deployment of antennas in the embedded ecosystem, but our speaker, Daniel Hamadi of 2J Antennas, took ill suddenly. So we certainly wish him a speedy recovery. But that does give us a few extra minutes on the panel if we need it. You can see the full schedule in the handout section of your interface. I will introduce the other speakers of the panel for this session in just a moment. But before we begin, we wanted to cover a few housekeeping items. I hope nobody's getting too much ambient alarms going off. I'm getting that here locally. Apologies for that. But like I said, a few housekeeping items. This webcast is being streamed through your computer, so there is no dial-in number. For the best audio quality, please make sure your computer speakers or headset are turned on and the volume is up so you can hear the presentations. An on-demand version of the webcast will be made available later today and can be accessed using the same audience link sent to you earlier. If you have any questions during the webcast, you can submit them through the Q&A box on the right side of your screen. The presenters may answer questions at the end of each session, but please feel free to ask your questions at any time during the presentations. Any unanswered questions may be responded to offline, and that's important. If you ask a question and we don't get to it, we will have a record of it, and our presenters will get back to you after the event. Please be sure to check the handout section of this interface on the right side of your screen. That our presenters will be providing materials to go along with the webcast. Again, before we get started, I'd just like to say a few words about my organization, which is producing this event, the IMC. Our group is the largest trade organization dedicated to the IoT sector, 28,000 rank and file members. We essentially have 2 levels of membership. We have adopter members who are individual product makers, designers, enterprise users, and apps developers that deploy IoT solutions. And we have sustaining members, which are roughly 35 companies that provide IoT solutions in the form of connectivity, hardware, and software. Our IMC adopters actually qualify to join our group as IoT buyers. And yes, there is a process for that. They join us to get the best IoT content there is, including our extensive library of use cases, white papers, news items, blogs, and research, as well as advanced notice of our events like this one. If you qualify as an IoT buyer, I suggest you check out our website where you can apply for membership. IMC sustaining member companies are technology providers that join our group to get exclusive access to the 28,000 adopters for purposes of thought leadership, lead generation, promotion, and research. Our sustaining companies include some very large providers that you know, Kyocera, Vodafone, Quectel, Tata, but also smaller, equally nimble companies that are very influential. And together, they form our IMC Board of Governors, which is, we think, the most influential group of IT leaders out there. If you have interest in joining this group, please reach out to me personally via our website. We look at the IMC as an industry accelerator. Our mission is to bring adopters and solutions providers together to technology for the public good. And we see today's session on deploying mass IoT as exactly in keeping with that mission. And with that, I'd like to introduce our panelists. And we'll start with Alistair Fulton, who is COO and VP of Ecosystem at Blues. Alistair's got over 25 years of experience spanning the development of solutions, platforms, tools, and ecosystems. Gives him a unique perspective on what customers need. He's a passionate believer in the critical role of IoT and LoRaWAN in addressing climate change and improving the lives of people everywhere. And that helps him assist his companies in agile deployment of the technology. Alistair, good morning and welcome.
Good morning, Keith. It's great to be here. Thanks. I think you covered my background pretty well. I've spent time as a systems integrator building solutions. I spent a good few years helping to incubate Microsoft's entry into the IoT space before moving on to build the Moderator platform for adeptly. And then I spent a few years running Semtech, which is the semiconductor business that invented and brought to market LoRa and LoRaWAN. And I'm now with a company called Blues, and I'll spend a couple of moments, if I may, just to explain, what exactly it is that we do at Blues. So at Blues, we're really focused on solving what I think is the main problem that has really held up deployment of the IoT. And because of all, despite of all of the advances in the tools that are available to IoT developers, that help them ingest, aggregate, and analyze data, including, more recently, the advent of artificial intelligence, we're still far, far short of where we need to be if we're going to fully utilize the IoT to increase efficiency, avoid waste, and really mitigate the causes of human-caused climate change. And there's one very big reason for that, in our view, that when it comes to building a connected device, the vast range of choices, tools that don't work together, complex development cycles, costs, carrier contracts, you name it. There's a whole bunch of stuff that stands in the way of developers from being simply able to connect devices like the refrigerator that you see here on the left-hand side of the slide. At Blues, we've really made it our mission to solve this barrier, to remove both the technical and the financial barriers that have historically held up the development of the IoT. Now, you'll see this little thing called a note card in the middle, and we support with our note card a whole range of different microcontrollers. Bring your own microcontroller, whether it's Espressive, ST, Micro, Arduino, you name it. We provide a range of note cards, which look rather like that little object there. They are integrated, interchangeable, plug and play, low power, and secure modules that support cellular, Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, LoRaWAN or an LPWAN of your choice, and more recently, satellite. Blues really sweeps away the barriers that have held back development with a simple API, 2 lines of JSON code, and contract-free data usage, which is included in the cost of hardware. And on the right-hand side, you can see Note Hub. And our Note Hub is a really thin cloud server that allows you to securely route your data to the cloud of your choice and perform routine tasks like provisioning fleets of devices, updating device firmware, and the like. Now, moving on to the next slide, what we've seen customers do with Blues time and time again is to use those simple tools to avoid the often endless cycle of spin and respin. And for those of you who've been in this space for a while, if you look at that top pink and red bar, I'm sure that's a somewhat of a history of some of the projects that you've worked on. Time and time again, going through iterations, trying to get the communication to work, trying to get the different components of the device to work. And it leads to, IoT projects stumbling, falling, and honestly, all too often failing, as that bar kind of tries to illustrate. Now, by providing tools that help you build a pilot that can scale all the way through to production, Blues really helps you turn your IoT solution in as little as half the time it used to take, and focus, pretty much all of the effort that you used to waste on trying to solve connectivity challenges on building the value that you want to deliver for customers in the first place. So that's kind of what we do, Keith.
Great stuff, Alistair. Let me shift gears and move to our next panelist, who is Kieran McNamara. Kieran's the general manager of North America with Eseye, and he's passionate about IoT. He's been working in the connectivity industry for over 21 years. As Eseye's GM in North America and sales account director, he helps global customers unlock the power of IoT and achieve their business goals. Prior to joining Eseye, Kieran was manager of IoT sales and channel development with TELUS in Canada. Kieran, good morning and welcome. I think you're muted.
Oh, off to a great start.
No worries. Hey, one thing I didn't know about you, Kieran. Are you Canadian?
I am indeed, here in Toronto.
Oh my! If I had known that, I would. I would have given you an entirely different welcome. Is all I could say.
Oh,
but welcome, and please continue.
Well, thank you. Well, great intro on my background. Really appreciate that, Keith. We can skip to the next slide, a bit about Eseye. So Eseye's been focused on three key pillars and addressing challenges in the IoT ecosystem. And we have independent data that backs similarly to what Alistair mentioned from a timeline perspective, but 80% of projects fail historically at enterprises deploying services to improve their business outcomes, or companies that are building that new product that they want to take to market independently. And we'll get into that in a moment, but I think it obviously speaks to the overall discussion around the panel here today. We focused our business and oriented our business on helping those enterprises and those solution providers address the challenges of device design, and typically that's down to the firmware level, as well as the end-to-end full stack device development requirements that they have, so that they can own their device design and address that key challenge of navigating the fragmented quilt of mobile networks that exist in the cellular ecosystem. We provide the platform, a single pane of glass, to manage that estate of connected devices that gets deployed around the world. So managing down to the rate plan level, but also providing insights into device performance that are powered by our ecosystem and by the devices that we help our customers build. And then we provide the largest federation of mobile network operators around the world. And we've typically focused on very difficult to access markets, notably Brazil, Turkey, in order to bring the most net new markets to customers that are trying to grow their footprint around the world. And so we work very positively and proactively with our operator partners. They are very much our enablers and allies in this ecosystem. And being creative and constructive with them is critical to success in the space is our view. And one of the other key areas here as well too is support. Conventional deployments struggle if you have with fragmentation. You have multiple lines of support that you may need to interact with, whereas because there's been the full end-to-end development support from the start with Eseye, we know the device and solution intimately, and we're able to address any challenges from a post-deployment perspective. So with that, we're able to deliver near 100% global connectivity uptime. We are able to reduce downtime as much as possible, up to 80% reduction in downtime, and we improve the success of projects about 75%. And we've been building this with a great stable of enterprise customers to enable their success. And our roster is very deep with the likes of Amazon, Caliper, and there are many more that we can go into around this. But we utilize EUICC technology, multi-IMC technology. We have a homegrown connectivity management platform, and we're really the only provider that takes a consultative device-first approach in the ecosystem. Thanks, Keith.
Thank you, Kieran. Appreciate that. And I should make it clear, I'm kind of abbreviating our introductions here today. You can get a full biography for each of our speakers. That's on the registration page of this platform. And with that, I'll introduce our final panelist, last but by no means least, Sam Colley, who's with product strategy at Giesecke+Devrient, G&D, we all know. Sam is also, by the way, currently the IMC chairman. So Sam, welcome and good morning. Sam is focused on business development within the mobile data connectivity market, specializing in M2M and business travel sectors for over 12 years. His forward-thinking approach to business development has propelled him from CEO of the Pod Group to his current position in product strategy with Giesecke+Devrient, the G&D empire, as we call it. And I personally know Sam for years and know for a fact that he built Pod's business from the ground up. And he continues to shape the future direction of the organization. Sam, again, welcome and good morning.
Thanks, Keith, and thanks for having me today. So just kind of an overview of who G&D are. I think from a kind of enterprise application developer perspective, often a brand that isn't necessarily heard of in day-to-day conversations, but one that has contributed a lot to the IoT ecosystem and also the consumer ecosystem over the years. And so, G&D is essentially the world's leading security tech company, and I think to think of that as kind of like anything you may have in your pocket. So be it, a credit card, a phone, an e-payment device, a passport, or cash even, is secured by G&D technology. And so really developing technology to protect the individual, and also now for the IoT as well. I think one of the key areas obviously has been the SIM card and also eSIM platforms. And I think, in that space, just some points that are important is G&D is the number one provider of eSIM worldwide today. It's done it at scale. So over 1 billion devices managed in the field, over 300 million total downloads, and a leader in iSIM and eSIM and all the kind of forward-thinking technologies that come along with it. And now with connectivity on board, are also kind of enabling that technology alongside connectivity, and that ownership of the stack is really important in terms of innovation. So just moving on to the next slide, and I guess more on to the topic of the day. Challenges in IoT sometimes feel endless, and we've definitely not reached that mass IoT that we've been talking about for the last kind of 10 years yet. But with, like some of the comments made by some of the other speakers, some of the changes in terms of approach, there really is the ability to kind of solve a lot of these challenges. So be it network coverage, be it interoperability, be it automated deployments, connectivity management and standards, and kind of security in particular, and then device management. But to scale, we need all of these things managed centrally, and by a single platform in order to do so. And so really, just to finish up, that's really where kind of G&D can come in. Really, it's about handing power back to the application developer or the enterprise or the automotive customer, or even the MNO or MVNO in some cases, in order to ensure they can deploy the right technology with the right level of security, and the maximum amount of flexibility, to ensure that kind of organization can focus their energies on developing what they know, which is the application. So yeah, that's a brief intro from me. So thanks.
Terrific. Thanks, Sid. Appreciate that, and appreciate all of our panelists joining us this morning. I'm going to start off with the 30,000-foot question. Why has the deployment of IoT solutions fallen so far short of expectations? Start with you, Alistair, and sort of tell us, what Blues is doing to address that. You're muted.
Apologies. I just like Sam. I mean, I think, in terms of what's actually held up, and I'm focused very much on the industrial Internet of Things, the IoT as opposed to IoT, though I think, part of the problem is that we've invented all of these buzzwords to describe what we're doing, when in actual fact, it's really just delivering data into back-end applications. And in fact, I think that's actually part of what's held up adoption of these technologies. We built separate islands, and we called them different things. And I think enterprise customers have been nothing but confused by that for a good number of years. We presented a myriad range of technologies, and those range from the 500 or so cloud platforms that existed at one point, through to every connectivity technology you could mention. There's a new one every week, it looks like, through to numerous tool chains, through to and we've done that because we're all engineers, and we think that that's the way that the world solves problems. And we forgot that we weren't actually talking to people like ourselves who were really just looking for a simple solution. I've always thought that there are three characteristics that really, define a technology that works. And that's, firstly, it's good enough for the job. It doesn't have to be the best, it just has to be good enough. It has to be easy to use, and it has to have a lot of friends. And if you look at the IoT space as a whole, the tools that we've provided have in general been anything but that. Now there are different approaches to how you can solve that sort of problem. I mean, for us at Blues, we're taking a tack which says what you want at the endpoint is a very simple tool to use that's fully integrated, that doesn't require that you as a developer who probably lacks radio or embedded or PCB design skills, it just makes it easy for you to build and deploy a connected device, freeing you up so that you can actually just focus on what it is you're trying to do. Now, that I described earlier, it's in the form of modules, they're plug and play. You can pull out the Wi-Fi one and stick in a cellular one, but it's really designed to make that simple act of connecting, which is usually anything but simple, make it accessible to a developer who, maybe cloud first, if you like, maybe JSON is the preferred language, that neither have nor want to have the deep skills to wade through this jungle of confusing alternatives that we've created for them.
Right. Couldn't agree more. In fact, a plurality of our IMC adopter members identify as operations, quote unquote, not IT and not product design and development. And we take that to mean these are business people with problems to solve. And, we assume that their technical understanding is not on a level of this esteemed panel. So your point is well taken. Kieran, Sam, any thoughts on that?
It's Alistair and I are going to rumble in this panel a little bit, because the approach I think we take is a little bit different in that I completely agree. The device and the edge is what matters, and making it simple for the enterprise or the solution designer to actually deliver the best experience at the edge. But good enough in many respects doesn't work across all potential industries. We actually have to, you need to have the highest availability at times, and that's going to take different technologies, multiple radio access technologies in a single device, and often in many scenarios. And you could look at EV charging as an area where that would be critical from a use case perspective. And our approach is a little different in that we want to empower the enterprise to actually build their own product around this and bring that expertise to bear, because there are still pitfalls around locking into operators, but we want to foster that independence and deliver that technology to them at the edge, because it really does. It has been historically very operator centric around the network technology, cellular being ubiquitous, provide a platform to manage the SIM card, and our view is that the SIM is an enabler of connectivity, and the device is really what enterprises need to focus on, and getting their data to the cloud reliably makes a mixture of all of those ingredients working together in harmony and concert. And
boy, for a Canadian to disagree, he's got to feel it strongly.
I don't think we're actually going to disagree that much on pretty much everything you said.
I had to say that. Sorry, I just had to say
a good try, but
a polite disagreement.
You're telling us a lot about yourself today, I think.
Sam, give us your thoughts. This is the big IoT question. I mean,
yeah, the two guys ahead of me, I think, have done a great job at kind of identifying a lot of the issues. And I think to go back to something Alistair was talking about really initially is this idea of interoperability, and I think it has been a nightmare between cloud, SIM, hardware, connectivity, and how do we tie all that together? How do we join the dots? And it has been a very siloed ecosystem to date. In some respects, it's being improved, but in other respects, it's being made more difficult sometimes. If we look at the LPWAN technologies by the cellular carriers, great technologies technically, but when you look on a global scale, which often people are deploying globally, they're not deployed globally at all, and a lot of the modules don't have fallback or whatever else, and that impacts cost. And so we're still a long way from solving some of these challenges, even within the individual silos that we have in IoT. So that's definitely been something that's held it back, but I think we're much more aware of that now, and there's companies really trying to kind of work horizontally as opposed to just looking vertically now, which is really helping. I think cost has been one of the other big issues really, and that is across the board, be it the cellular connection, be it the hardware availability, and all these sorts of things. And we are now really starting to see costs come down, but there's, again, not to be too pessimistic, there's still a ways to go. A cellular plan, even at 10 cents a month, isn't going to satisfy what I would classify as like mass IoT type applications, be it, a smoke alarm that's going to ping once every 10 years or something along those lines, or an alarm. So, we've still got some technology to problems to solve. I think we're doing a good job at solving some of those, but yeah, I think all of these things kind of just fit together. There's no one reason why we haven't scaled. It's a lot of things, and I think as we move forward, more and more of those will be addressed by kind of leaders in industry like ourselves, Eseye and Blues. So yeah,
certainly hope that's correct. Sam, talk to us a little bit about addressing heterogeneous environments. How do you address connectivity issues in diverse platforms and such? Talk to us.
Yeah, as I mentioned, I think connectivity is still super complex, and I think, you know, even with the same device, the same application, where that's deployed even creates, you know, variables, right? Because no, you know, single area has the same level of coverage or the same technology availability potentially. I think looking at the satellite space, of, you know, reading some of the statistics, is that only 15% of the world's surface is covered by terrestrial networks. So, you know, you've got 85% of the world that doesn't have any coverage using traditional cellular, at least, and to deploy other kind of infrastructure, you know, like LoRaWAN may be difficult in those areas because you still need potentially some backhaul or something along those lines. But, you know, I think in terms of how we can help address them, you know, really it's about, well, how do we enable flexibility really? So, you know, and then automation when it comes to provisioning of connectivity. So, you know, how does a device choose what connectivity it needs when it's first powered on based on whatever is happening locally, you know, like, or wherever it lands up? That's one of the key things. How do we remove some of the blocking technologies like SMS, maybe within the eSIM environment? You know, not all devices support SMS, particularly the lightweight ones. You know, and how do we avoid vendor or, from a cellular perspective, or even technology lock-in as well on those devices, so that, you know, various technologies could be deployed, you know, be it satellite, cellular, or other, you know, in an environment where one maybe isn't really there. And how do we provision these things basically without touching them? So that's the automation piece, or the zero touch provisioning. Even, you know, the APN or the port number or the IP, how's that provisioned in field in real time when that device is turned on? And so really, I think, you know, those are the kind of questions and solutions we have to really kind of addressing, you know, IoT deployments in these diverse environments. And it's, I think someone said it needs to be the device, but in my mind, it needs to be the device plus the SIM plus the network, in order to combine all of those kind of data sets in order to make really smart decisions when those devices come online and they just, you know, get what they need. That's kind of the
But what about the device? I mean, you talked to us just now about diversity in connectivity. Obviously, there's equal, if not more, diversity in hardware. How do you ensure things like interoperability and adherence to standards when it comes to the you know, diverse devices?
Yeah, that's a good question, and it's a difficult question. But, you know, I think Alistair will have plenty to say on this after after maybe had to go. But and Kieran, but I think standards are there for a reason, right? We don't. I mean, sometimes they can be, you know, for like we saw with SGPO2, they can almost be a barrier to technology adoption if the standard isn't written for the consumption of those who need it, but written for those who maybe want to protect themselves from change. But, you know, I think from an SGP32 perspective, so the new standard, I think, you know, it is a much more open platform, and I think kind of picking partners that are already working with OEMs, already have a good level of understanding on the device. And an example using SGP32 would be this kind of whole conundrum of IPAE versus IPAD. You know, IPAE is a great technology for devices that can't support IPAD. You know, lightweight devices maybe don't have the processing power to have it locally on the device. But technically, IPAE isn't. There's some standards around it, but there's going to be lots and lots of different solutions out there and how IPAE is implemented. So how can you guarantee that SIM enabled with IPAE works on 6 different devices? Essentially, you can't really, to some extent, but, you know, you'd hope that the implementation is good enough that it does. With IPAD, for example, that's a standard based kind of piece of code that is implemented on the device level, that no matter which device supports the IPAD, really, that SIM should have a much more kind of higher probability of working really across the board. So I think it's kind of looking at how you can kind of work, yeah, with the OEMs, and, you know, that relationship between SIM vendor, connectivity vendor, hardware vendor, in order to kind of make sure that we're taking a, you know, more standard approach to the implementation of this technology, and it not just being a kind of land grab for, you know, specific features to try and differentiate yourself in the market, because sometimes that creates more confusion than solving problems. So,
Alistair, sounds like you're teed up, man.
Yeah, I was going to say. I mean, I think
I'll come to Kieran in a second, but it's your first crack.
the challenge. I mean, the challenge of connectivity issues is a tough one. I mean, I guess I touched on this earlier. When you look at the range of wireless tools out there, and let's face it, you know, for rapid deployment and you know, deployment on assets that move, etc., you know, wireless is the best method. And for a good long time, and still, I think cellular is an extremely dependable set of tools for connectivity. It's not the best tool for every job, but when you look at the range of tools that are available, there's a pretty good spread across, LP-WAN, and obviously I've got a bit of a favorite in the form of LoRaWAN, given my history, but LP-WAN, nearer field communications, Wi-Fi, but the tools are kind of already there. That's not to say there won't continue to be improvements in these radio technologies, because there will be, and that's kind of an inevitable function of the industry. But I'm also really painfully conscious that our customers live in a world where a 20-year expectation is not out of the realm of reasonableness for how long you want a system to be available and how long you want it to work. And I've been asked by customers in the past to sign up to 35-year commitments, for industrial customers, that the technology that we're building is going to be there. And it's because when they build the factory, they install whatever sensing technology they need, and they expect that to last for the life of the factory. So this constant cycle of innovation in wireless, we are our own worst enemy in some respects. It is such an issue because the design process at the moment, very often involves a whole bunch of one-way decisions right at the beginning. So, you talked about IPAE versus IPAD, and it's Sam, and it's you face all these choices right at the beginning of the design cycle that tie you into this, whole funnel of work. That if you change your mind, or if you have to change your mind because, hey, maybe the network is sunset, you then have to reverse back and take on a lot of the expense that you incurred the first time. You have to do over. And so what we think, there is a technical solution to that problem, and that is to really abstract away the radio layer behind a very simple uniform API that applies regardless of what technology you're using. That you abstract away the hardware still further by having a universal connector on every single hardware module. That means that your code base never changes unless you want it to. It means you can swap out one technology and plug in the other and carry on without having to go back through rework. And those modules are obviously pre-certified, et cetera, et cetera. So they're ready to go, and you don't have to do anything else to certify the device once you've plugged it in. I think, so that's the technical issue. I think there's also, a commercial issue, and Sam, you hinted at this too. You not only have to pick your technology, but, depending on what choice you make, you then have to marry a provider. You're essentially binding yourself. If you go straight to a cellular operator, which is not normally the model, I mean, that's why Eseye exists and why there are many other companies that are offering that kind of a commercial abstraction layer, if you like, so you don't have to deal with all these different operators. But you're still very often tied into, a lifetime of cost. And so there, what we've tried to do, and, this is one approach at it, is to say, okay, well, for the cellular module, you have a global cellular module that comes with accelerometer, it has GPS on it, et cetera, but it also comes with enough connectivity, ideally to last the device for 10 years in the cost of the hardware. So that if you're an industrial customer or an enterprise customer and you're building something that you're selling to someone else, you have cost certainty. You know exactly how much it's going to cost for the device to be connected, and you can wrap it into the overall price. The thing we've done recently is actually take that model and apply it to satellite. The satellite, again, I think, Sam, you hinted at this, there are some great technologies for connectivity, but they're not everywhere. And unfortunately, if you have assets that roam outside of those coverage areas, which typically correspond to where human beings live, you're in trouble. Or if you're trying to monitor a pipeline in the middle of nowhere, you're without a network unless you use satellite. And historically, the cost of satellite has been an enormous inhibitor. So what we've done with satellites, apply that same model. Now, we regard what we've done in satellite as definitely a backup product. It's there just in case of emergency. So if your device that's connected over cellular gets stolen, whatever, it can phone home. And that satellite module, again, for $49, includes enough connectivity for a year with no monthly subscription, no carry cost, no nothing. It's there.
I was going to say, Alistair, the cost of satellite there's a lot of new things going on there that's bringing the cost down.
there are, and it needs to, because satellite is a vital part of the jigsaw.
Right. Kieran, I'm sure you got some things to say here. One of our audience members asking about Eseye specifically in regards to LoRa. Talk to us about diversity.
Oh, I did want to just cover off a moment there, though, Keith, if I could, because I do think from a commercial perspective, and I'll focus on the commercials, I do think there is a lot of, the evolving nature of commercial models. We're navigating a lot of changes imposed on our customers. Customers need to make decisions at the start of a project, device design considerations. They need to, they're locking in their device, and then change can be imposed on them. Networks or spectrum is refarmed and so on, and that has massive implications because operators are making changes specifically on the cellular side on their side. So having a fixed upfront price for connectivity is very attractive. It certainly is it's certainly disruptive in the market to some degree, and has been for some time now. But I question the sustainability of that approach, because what's underpinning that is relationships that can evolve a lot in the years ahead. So it's very difficult to know in 10 years if a price can be honored. It's difficult to know in 5 years if a price can be honored. We know that there's pressure on price all the time, and that they're always going to move in that direction. But it's not necessarily the safest bet that price is always going to be available, and that what's underpinning that connectivity is going to be available through the ecosystem. Sorry, I'm just going to pull up the Q&A. If you want to have a price build for prepared tools for enterprise to do this. Yes, we have on the LoRaWAN side. Yes, we have reference designs that we make available to customers, and we do this through consultative engagement for NOLAN.
Okay. Great. A good segue into the next question, which is, if IIoT and perhaps more broadly IoT is a partnering game, we're talking about diversity, different approaches. I mean, why has it taken so long on the solutions provider side to sort of accept this and make that a part of offerings? Alistair.
I think I'm going to sound cynical again, unfortunately, but I've been around in this space for long enough to say that it's okay to be cynical, because I think we've all been lured by the promise of what the IoT could do for us, and I think we've all universally been disappointed. I mean, it's by definition, when you look at an industrial application, it spans many different aspects. And ultimately, people talk about customer ownership. No one owns the customer, by the way. The customer owns themselves. And they are responsible for creating that jigsaw of pieces. Now, so far, we've given them whole jigsaws. Every provider has given them a whole jigsaw and said, look, I solved all the problem. Because, and I say we, because I've been in the space, it's my fault too. We thought we could do everything. We thought we could be the total solution. And we wanted to lick all the cookies, as I say. We wanted to, because we weren't quite sure in the beginning where we were going to make money. So we thought it would be better if we covered all of our bases and made sure that if you want analytics, I can do analytics. You want device management, I can do device management. We talked about all of these things because we thought that we could claim those billions of devices for ourselves. All those analyst forecasts of those huge, great big hockey stick curves, they had our shareholders, salivating, more than they had ever done so before. And that ambition and greed, that gold rush, left enterprise and industrial customers who really needed these solutions to become more efficient.
I call it the Marx Brothers approach. You want shirts? We got shirts. You want pants?
We got shirts. And we left the customer high and dry. And in doing so, we left ourselves without these tools to help. Again, I go back to it. This is a mission that we are all on. We have a responsibility to use these tools to improve, what's causing human-caused climate change. And we have failed in that regard through base human greed. That's my cynicism for the morning.
Yeah, fair cynicism, I think, Alistair. And I think just to add on that, I do think, we're in a world where you're a business and you need to make money, and you're going to try and do what you can do to kind of excite your investors or, give you the most potential from a profit perspective. And I think like I mentioned earlier, that has been one of the challenges in that, to some extent it's been everyone out there for themselves, because no one understood maybe the challenges that would create within the industry at the time, because it was new, and therefore maybe we haven't been able to kind of create an ecosystem that's interoperable enough or flexible enough that you can kind of pick and choose partners and bring them all together in an easy way that you don't need to be a super programmer to do so. And I think that has been what's held us up, and then that's what I do think is now changing. And I think a lot of people are realizing that you can't do everything. People are very good at certain things, but how do you create the dots between those? And I think that's what's starting to happen, but we're still not fully there yet. But I do think it is improving. But you can't blame people for the reason it was like it was, because that was the nature of it, I think. But yeah.
Yeah, Kieran, Gartner's quoting something like 80% of all global IoT projects fail. Is this a part of that?
Absolutely. That's the outcome of what everything Alistair mentioned, and to a great degree, in my view. It fails because we're not able to knit together all of those various players in the ecosystem, and we're always chasing some new holy grail of technology that's going to solve this problem. And we need to be able to, the tools are all in front of us to build very robust, high resilient, long-lived solutions that customers can depend on. But knitting it together is the real challenge. And I do think, frankly, it's forums such as this where we all discover a little bit about our strengths and weaknesses, and our customers and partners can see what everybody brings to the table, where we can build those relationships to deliver the best outcome for customers to a great degree. Because I do think we are at an inflection point where the enabling technology is really there now, with the likes of NTN emerging, LoRaWAN, and then something like Wi-Fi Halo I find to be fairly interesting for long range, high throughput data connectivity. So there is a lot of emerging capabilities that are compelling now, that I think we do have some scars from the past, so to speak, and I think we can overcome them a lot more easily now, given where
Talk to us, Kieran, about reducing complexity on the connectivity side of things. How do regionally focused network operators do that in addressing global deployments?
I think we haven't touched on this at all, but operators, the network operators, MNOs, are struggling in the space now, especially your regional ones, regionally focused ones, because they're missing out, and they've been a real, they're one of the key enablers of our success, particularly on the cellular side. Like Sam would probably agree with me on that, in terms of what customers have historically looked for on the cellular space, because their cellular has been very ubiquitous global has been able to deliver ubiquitous global connectivity, but the market barriers are going up, and you do need solutions around that. I think working productively with operators and establishing new partnership structures is going to be very important for operator success.
Right. Yeah. Right. I couldn't agree more, and want to shift gears a little bit here in our discussion and talk specifically about security. I know here at the IMC, we're heavily engaged in talking to the FCC in the States, but also to the EU, and tracking things going on in Singapore. There's a lot going on. Much of it, at least here in the States, is concerned with device layer in the stack, if you will. But obviously, it's much broader than that if you really want to address security concerns. And Sam, I guess I turn to you and say, start us out here. What are some of the key considerations in security, in designing at scale, and how do you mitigate risk?
Yeah, and I think I can't even answer like what all the different security considerations need to be honest. I'm not that aware of the full stack, but I think no one part of the stack can be looked at in isolation. So I mean, you could secure a device, but if you haven't got a secure cloud, then you've done a little bit of the work, but not really enough. Likewise, if you've got a secure cloud and a secure device, but your network isn't secure, then you're creating possible threat planes there, and even down to the kind of like embedded elements in your hardware. they all need to be considered. And I think that's one of the things we're kind of struggling from a regulatory perspective to really address at the moment. You mentioned the FCC stuff, and it is very device focused, which, to some extent is great that it's starting a process, right? Maybe it's starting a conversation, and, over time it will start to address more and more elements of the ecosystem. But, if we do start to see real scale today in IoT, and it's already pretty big, all of those legacy devices probably aren't fully, not devices, but applications and deployments aren't really covered. And then you've got, the potential to kind of, in the interim, whilst we kind of figure out the whole stack, what additional threat do we create
Exactly.
ourselves? And the last thing we want is IoT getting a bad name, because that's only going to slow us down even more. I mean, from our perspective on the SIM and the network side, there are a lot of things you can consider. Obviously, you need to make sure your partners individually with their specific knowledge are contributing to your security strategy, in a very proactive way, and not just sitting on the sidelines. In Sully, they've got things like IoT Safe, which is fine, but maybe it's fine. I don't know how better to describe IoT Safe, but there are other advanced solutions that are also SIM based, like Signet, which is kind of a technology that leverages kind of blockchain to make sure you have authenticity of that data all the way through its life cycle, which can be important. On the network side, really looking at how we can kind of detect threats on the network layer itself, and do that autonomously, and not just detect them, but also maybe take action. And I think this is where private network, or historically, and maybe 5G could maybe help, is that if their threat is detected, you could immediately and autonomously quarantine an asset into a little slice of its own, investigate that asset without potentially then compromising the rest of your field while you try and figure out whether it was just a red flag or a mistake. But yeah, I think it's kind of very, it's complex, and and I think you just need to make sure that, as I say, you have the conversation with each of your providers and each of the elements that are coming to you, and a more integrated solution, like you get from maybe a Blues there with the hardware plus the connectivity and things. They have more ownership of that stack for sure, and hopefully, I'm sure Alistair is, putting a lot of effort into making sure what they have is secure, and how that interacts with these other third parties is interacting in a way that can kind of prevent security threats coming from those from impacting its own infrastructure. And that's also kind of what we're doing on the network side, SIM card side, connectivity side. Yeah, I think we need to see a bit more regulation, and I think we need some more broader guidelines than just device, in order to kind of really accelerate the conversation.
Right. I mean, Alistair, if anyone here would have a sort of a holistic perspective, I would assume it was you. Thoughts on security and what's happening out there?
I can remember a conversation I had with a customer years and years ago, and it was an automotive parts manufacturer in Lithuania. And at the time, I was talking to him about an IoT cloud platform I was working on, and I described to him this fantastic platform and all the things it could do, etc. And he said, "Great, the analytics look fantastic. The only problem is what you're talking about is the core of my business, because my competitor has the same machines as me, builds the same products as me, and employs people who look very similar. The only difference is how I've configured my production facility, and the data that flows off that tells people how I've done that. And that's the data you want me to put in the cloud?" And at that moment, I knew the meeting was going quite badly, and it didn't really get any better after that. But security is front and center, and actually, to sound a little bit less like I guess a naive idealist, yes, we all needed to figure out in this space how to make money, and we didn't know in the first place. I actually think that security is one of those. It's one of the first areas where people have started to recognize that there are experts in the space, and that there are defined models which are secure innately. And obviously that's what we build to at Blues, with a secure store on the device and encryption and private VPN instead of public internet for all those things. There are some very standard kind of ways that you can make sure a device is in itself secure, but you still need to have a holistic view on security across the entire application, both from the inputs, all the way through to the outputs. How are you communicating back down to the device? How secure is your data in the cloud? And I think we've all recognized that we're not all good at that, as companies. And there has been the emergence of actually, both of you folks, the companies that actually really focus on this space and really build deep understanding and expertise, and can give industrial and enterprise customers the confidence that their data is going to be secure. There's not been a lot of kind of heat and light around security. The individual sensors being hacked and your car being hacked, and and it's easy sometimes to dismiss those. And I've heard too many times people say, "Oh, well, it's only one sensor. What can you do with hijacking one sensor?" But without realizing that it from a customer's point of view, it's all or nothing. If there's a hole in the bottom of the boat, it doesn't matter that there's just one hole. There's a hole in the bottom of the boat, and someone needs to fix it. So I think security is the first, but there are many other areas as well where expertise around edge intelligence, for example. There are companies that are emerging in this space, many of whom we partner with, who have deep expertise and specialism in that space, and can offer that to customers in a robust and scalable way. Because honestly, I think a lot of customers have just been sitting and waiting. I went to an industry event recently that was very focused on industrial automation. And of the 300 or so vendors there, one of them was talking about wireless IoT solutions. One of them. Everyone else, Ethernet was the cutting edge. And there's a simple reason for that, because Ethernet is an unknown quantity. And there isn't this kind of halo of security concern around things that are hardwired. The cost is prohibitive, the implementation is nightmarish, but it tells you how much customers value that certainty that they will walk through, broken glass in the form of wired connectivity to get to the end prize rather than take a risk.
Right.
So I think it's center.
Right. Certainly, Kieran, you've got to see this.
It's the
global solutions for cellular.
Yeah, it's the starting point of every conversation we have with a customer around device design. It has to be baked in from the start, and it has to be the number one device design consideration, frankly. Nowadays, I mean, I don't think anybody, the real world example that everyone lived through here was Colonial Pipeline. That's an example that impacted the economy in a material way for most North Americans. If you don't get the device right, you don't have security at the edge and through the entire value chain, there's going to be challenges, and those challenges can manifest themselves in very uncertain ways and undetermined. Yeah, and I do think, again, going back to partnering as an example, this is one where everybody needs to be very transparent about how they're going to address these challenges. There's no other. It's got to be part of our common language, in the same way that we talk about SIM form factors and device physical interfaces. We need to be talking about how we're going to secure the device from end to end, and what policy and level we expect.
Right. I mean, at the IMC, like I said, we're heavily engaged, and we're spending a lot of time on this right now. We are in the process of forming 3 working groups, one for each layer in the stack. So there will be a network working group, there will be a device level working group, and a platform/cloud, an app cloud group. And where that takes us, we're not exactly sure. We don't anticipate getting into the technical standards business or the certification business anytime soon, but we're hoping that we could develop a sort of set of guidelines or business best practices that people could take into consideration, that may have to be subdivided into particular applications. There may be healthcare, a set of healthcare guidelines. There may be a set of critical infrastructure guidelines, but whatever it is we're talking, or industrial manufacturing, whatever it is we're talking about, may need its own set, but we're just getting our feet wet. We look at what the FCC is talking about in the States. We don't denigrate it at all. I think what Sam said is exactly correct. It's kind of their attempt to get started. But we do see addressing every layer to be critical. And, so far, the group in internal discussions is pointing in that direction. We're going to try to address all 3 layers and give some subtlety, if you will, some nuance that will be really helpful for people. That's kind of our mission, and we're hopeful. Just getting started though, and it is a whole conversation unto itself. Shifting gears again, want to talk and sort of bring us in towards a close with a discussion about hyperscalers. 2014, we saw all of the big telcos get involved in. They all had 3-year business plans. Business plans didn't go according to plan, as it were. And in 2017, we saw a lot of them backing away from the market. We saw the same thing with the hyperscalers at about that time. At about the same time, the telcos were getting, stepping back. The hyperscalers were stepping in, talking Google, AWS, Microsoft, IBM, and more. And they came in. I think COVID, quite honestly, sort of delayed their 3-year plans. But we've seen in the last year or so a lot of them stepping back from IoT in general, sort of their IoT specific offerings, if you will. What does that all mean? How should we interpret that? Alistair, thoughts?
Well, having been sitting in a hyperscaler, and really driving the early kind of stages of IoT incubation, I think there are some kind of big lessons from that have taken a while for folks to absorb. One was, hyperscalers, are used to or were used to being able to unleash, massive avalanches of cash. The speed with which you can grow a software-only business and a cloud business is blistering. And I think, we all came to the IoT space seeing this massive opportunity and honestly this massive need for these technologies, and we figured it was going to be just like software. And as we all know on this panel, it ain't like software. It's not. I think the typical timeline for developing IoT solutions, if you're lucky, as Kieran was saying, if you don't fail, then if you get there in 36 months, then you're doing a pretty good job. And that just didn't correspond with the hyperscalers' business view of the world, nor, by the way, did it correspond with the way that VCs, in the Valley saw the opportunity, because, and I think this contributed to some of the lack of partnership in the early days. They piled money into startups on the basis that these startups were going to become unicorns overnight. And in order to deliver that revenue expectation, these startups had to kind of figure out how to do everything, because they had to take the whole pie. And as it became clearer to people that, us software geniuses wandering into this world of hardware, as we realized that it quite kind of the rules are different and it kind of works in a different way, disappointment kicked in fairly early. There were a lot of angry VC conversations, I think, over the course of that period. And the hyperscalers, Google being the first, really started to look at it and think, am I going to get to $1 billion in revenue in the next 2 years? Because that's really how I function. And if it's less than $1 billion, it's not worth me doing it. So I think that was kind of the mindset thing. On the actual practicality of what the market needed, like we were saying earlier, those hyperscalers themselves did a really good job of educating customers, enterprise and industrial customers, why having a single source supplier was a really bad idea. Really bad idea. And as a consequence, when they turned up with the full smorgasbord of goodies, enterprise customers looked at them and said, I've seen this trick before. I know this game. I know what happens next. What happens next is I pay you all my money and you deliver a service to me, hopefully, and I'm stuck with you because I can't really switch away. I'm so deeply ingrained, and this is just another strand of that. I think the other thing we talked about earlier, it's people realizing what they're good at and where they should focus. I mean, for Blues, it's really simple. We focus on a very small part of the jigsaw. We focus on getting data securely from A to B. It's not our business to worry about what microcontroller you use, what device you connect. It's not our business what cloud you want the data routed to. We are simply a transit network that gets you from A to B securely and it turns up right. And I think now that companies in the space, providers in the space, are starting to kind of appreciate that, enterprise customers are allowed or able to start viewing sensor-generated data as they always wanted to. It's just another data stream. It's the same as the data that I get off the PLC that's on my conveyor belt. It just gives me a greater degree of visibility. It allows me to relate back into my ERP system and my IT systems that tell me what the outcomes of activity are. It just gives me that 360 view. And because of that, I want that data as quickly as possible into those analytic tools in my back end. I know how to work with that data, and I know how to build predictive models. If I've got it separated in this separate IoT platform island, then what do I take the insights generated from that just little slice of my visibility and integrate it with the how do I put these two things together? I want one central data infrastructure, and I want all of the data. So I think that's also why those hyperscale platforms that kind of purported to do everything and be everything, but be a separate thing you had to pay for, ultimately just didn't get the traction that was expected. And so the hyperscalers turned them off.
Backbone integration, just another huge subject. Talking ERP, CRM systems, how do you integrate those things? It's a whole conversation in and of itself, of course. Sam, talk to us about this subject, but perhaps put it in perspective of a product maker, a designer, or an OEM. Looking forward, what does it all mean? How do they ensure themselves more seamless experiences?
Yeah, I mean, on the hyperscaler side, I think Alistair ticked a lot of the boxes in terms of why they failed, and I think, well, not failed, but why they kind of stepped back. And I think to his point as well, it is about what are you good at, what do you specialize in, and I think that historically why some people may have considered maybe the hyperscaler as approach is because you do get a lot of tools that do work relatively seamlessly together. But as the markets evolved, as I said earlier, like these dots are being joined, so you can maybe pick the best tool for X and the best tool for Y, and it's not going to take a genius to integrate those on your back end or to get that data back into your ERP or CRM or wherever it goes at the end of the day. And I think and I think that's the realization, is that that's people's preference. Maybe there was some interest to start with in the hyperscaler, but then it didn't scale because people realized it's not the ideal solution for them. And so, yeah, that's kind of I think where I see. I mean, I'm not super into the hyperscaler space, but that's kind of my interpretation of it in general. But and I completely forgot the second part of your question, Keith. Sorry.
Well, just talking about product designers, makers, OEMs. How does it look moving forward for them? In terms of a better experience deploying.
Yeah, I think it's there's hope, right? there's opportunity now, and I think as I said, it's really just about the speed at which you come to market. Like 36 months, like you mentioned, isn't an unrealistic timeline maybe historically for IoT deployments to become realized, but that needs to be 6 to 9 months realistically. Like it needs to, well, maybe not 6 to 9, but it needs to be a lot shorter than 36, because the speed at which this industry moves and the speed at which technology moves, is kind of frightening sometimes. And so maybe what you've designed in month one, like I think these guys mentioned earlier, you're designing these things in, and then maybe you need to make a change and start again. You kind of want to get ahead of the curve a little bit and shorten your time to market. But you have to invest a lot in these applications. You have to invest a lot in the infrastructure. And if you're not getting any sort of kind of payback for 36 months, it's a tough pill to swallow for a lot of companies. And that's could be why people kind of pull back from these opportunities, because they're like, well, I can't justify this anymore without seeing some return. But I think, as I say, I think it's becoming a lot easier. I think there'll be this kind of balance, this consolidation in the market where, maybe the people aren't doing everything, but they'll take steps horizontally, kind of combine certain elements of technology to be able to offer those more seamlessly where it makes sense. And that will again kind of speed up this cycle and this process. And I think, we're kind of seeing a bit of that now, but yeah, I think,
I hope it's the case.
yeah, overall, I think there's less barriers to entry now. And I think we will see quicker development cycles and quicker learnings and, faster evidence that you might fail or it's not the right application, so you don't waste so much money. And that will encourage companies, I think, to invest more in IoT and invest more in kind of pushing the boundaries of what might actually work and not, and take more risks, and therefore then achieve maybe more scale at IoT with more applications.
Right.
And Sam, you make a good point in that the trade-off with the hyperscale platforms was at least the tools work together. What you put in at one end of the pipe was going to come out the other end of the pipe in more or less the form that you expected. And I think that's really true. I think it was a very big trade-off for customers to make. And I think that some of the other factors around how we position these tools and the way that we talked about them as though we were talking to software developers didn't help. But that trade-off was a big one, and tying themselves to a vendor for the next 20 years of their lives was just too much of a commitment, too scary.
Right. Kieran, we're getting down to it. I'm going to leave the last word to you, my Canadian friend.
I'll be great. I think Alistair, Sam and Alistair did a great job covering that, because I do think when you're adapting, and I think some of the disappointment the hyperscalers may have felt internally was they're adapting the physical world and inputs from the physical world into the digital world, and that's very challenging no matter what. And ultimately, you're not going to be able to do that at the speed, because there's much more regulatory oversight. It is much more fragmented. It's much more fragmented. It's not quite an ecosystem, but it's actually the environment you're operating in, because you've got, you have a patchwork of technologies, patchwork of operator networks to work across. And those tools certainly addressed the application side of it, but they didn't address the core connectivity side. And I just think it's too slow from, to go back to Alistair's earlier point, for it to be a meaningful business case. So I think they've stepped back to the areas now where they've historically been and added the most value, and by extension, there's still a lot of opportunity for all of us to work on in this space. So solving the edge to cloud is a very valuable. It is where the real opportunity lies in IoT, and I think that's where everyone on this call is focused, and we're all building tools and capabilities and go-to-market strategies around that edge. So.
Amen. Well, first of all, thank you to my panelists, Sam, Kieran, Alistair. Thanks so much for taking the time this morning. Special thanks to our audience as well for joining us. Please join us at Embedded World in Nuremberg, Germany, coming up in April. The IMC will be there. And subsequent to that live event, we'll be doing another IoT summit on AI, service level agreements and supply chain in May. So if you've got an interest in those subjects, please join us then. Thanks once again to my panel. Thanks to the audience, and goodbye.
Cheers. Goodbye.
Bye.